Hi everyone. So for this week's research project, I decided to cover microbial infections. This was the most interesting topic that we've covered this session to me personally. I plan to go into nursing, so microbial infections are something that are super common and you see in day-to-day cases. And I definitely just wanted to dive more into this for my own education and to show kind of what I specifically found the most interesting out of what we covered during the lecture. So to start off, we're going to talk about what microbial infections are. So microbial infections are infections of the skin, respiratory system, digestive system, genitourinary tract system, blood lymphatic system, and the nervous system. Basically, all of your body systems can be susceptible to microbial infections. All of the infections are caused by various pathogenic microbes such as bacteria, viruses, or even fungi. Some tend to be less severe, but they still will cause some sort of harm to the body since they're not typically supposed to be there. But some may lead to death, actually, if they're left untreated as well. So how do microbial infections actually begin? So every infection needs some form of entry into the body to start the infection. So whether that means wounds, the respiratory system, oral cavity or your mouth, the genitourinary tract, or insect bites on the skin, all of those are portals of entry for many microbial infections. So for wounds, if you have a wound that is open, it's not being taken care of, it's not being cleaned, it can let in a lot of bacteria from your external environment, whether that's outside, if you're outside getting dirty or sweating and it's just not being kept clean. That can cause a lot of issues, as well as just your typical skin bacteria that's normally external can get in when the skin is broken. So for the respiratory system, if you're breathing in droplets of another sick person or just breathing in not the best air, it can just cause a lot of problems internally as well. For your oral cavity or your mouth, if you're eating undercooked food, if you're drinking after somebody that is sick, that can also cause a lot of problems and enter it through the mouth that way. The genitourinary tract, we learned a lot about sexually transmitted diseases, UTIs, things like that, that external bacteria can get inside that way and cause more problems in that direction. As well as insect bites, insects can carry a lot of parasites, bacteria that cause no harm to them, but can be modes of transmission to us and actually cause more problems in our bodies. So those are all ways that you can contract microbial infections, as well as contact with contaminated surfaces and infected people. Pretty much all of those ways, any type of contact, you can get sick that way. So fighting microbial infections. I have two different sections here, preventative measures and once you already are infected. For preventative measures, I have vaccinations, which I believe are very important in keeping microbial infections under control. There's a lot of things that, a lot of vaccines that we have now that are very successful in preventing a lot of different cases of different microbial infections. Cleaning surfaces regularly, washing your hands, and preparing food properly are also great ways to make sure if you have a wound that stays clean, that there's just not your typical buildup of pathogenic microbes just in your environment in the cases that you do have a wound or you're exposed to the microbes in some way, that there's less microbes to be exposed to. For once you're already infected, a lot of the things that we covered do thankfully have antibiotics or antivirals or something like that to help you once you're already sick. There were a couple things we learned about that don't have treatments right now but are in development. So antibiotics to kill bad bacteria, antivirals to tame a lot of viruses and get those under control, antifungals, and then your typical rest, hydration, and staying away from others to slow the spread and keeping other people safe and healthy. So now we can get into my personal interests and like what I thought was super cool to learn about over this topic during the session. So the first infection that I wanted to go over is a skin infection, which is chickenpox that could later turn into shingles. So I find this skin infection or one of these microbial infections to be particularly interesting because I actually had chickenpox as a kid, and I think it's really interesting that it's a latent virus, which means that it starts as chickenpox and then later in life could develop into shingles. Again, I find that interesting because I had chickenpox as a kid and could possibly end up with shingles later in life. There is a vaccine for this virus. I was actually vaccinated for it as a kid and was a part of a very small percentage that is still able to get it once you're vaccinated. But I had chickenpox whenever I was in like preschool and will eventually get the shingles vaccine. So this particular infection spreads with physical contact with the skin that actually has the chickenpox or saliva of the infected person. It's started by the varicella zoster virus, and like I said, it is a latent virus which could possibly turn into shingles later in life. So the next infection that I thought was interesting that we covered was the common cold. It is very typical, nothing really special to it. I just personally found it interesting because it's literally in the name that it's so common and that there's no treatment or vaccine for it. It's kind of just like seasonal allergies. Like you're just expected to get it, in December whenever it gets cold and everybody gets sick around the same time of year. And so it starts by inhaling infected droplets containing various rhinoviruses. That's the other interesting part to me is that there's so many viruses that can cause a cold. That they don't really, that's why we can't have a vaccine for it, because it's just, there's too many and there's no really way to determine what you're going to get, so there's no way to vaccinate for it. I just think it's so interesting that we all get the same symptoms and that it's so common to get this, at a certain time of year or something, and that we don't really know a whole lot about it. So it was a super interesting respiratory system infection to learn about and kind of figuring out like what we could possibly do about it in the future, given that it is so common. Luckily, it doesn't, unless it progresses into something more like pneumonia or bronchitis and things like that, that the common cold doesn't pose much of a threat. It's just kind of sucky to deal with in the moment. But I just thought it was super interesting to learn about, and knowing that we don't know a whole lot about it was kind of cool to me, even though it's so common. So the next infection I wanted to talk about is a blood lymphatic system infection, which is tularemia. It's an infection caused by coming in contact with Francisella tularensis bacteria, which is the first one that I've covered that starts with bacteria. The other two were viruses. And it's typically found in animals. Whenever I was doing more research into this specific infection, it actually is a nickname of the rabbit disease, or the rabbit infection, because it's typically spread by rabbits and found in animals a lot. I found this one particularly interesting because I'd never heard about it before, and that it is marked as a bioterrorism agent because it's very hard to treat and spreads rapidly. So I thought that was a really interesting aspect, that something so kind of crazy that I never heard about is actually a bioterrorism agent, and that it could cause a lot of harm, and that it's ranked the way that it is. So I thought that was super interesting to cover as well.